Thank you. Welcome again. Good morning. We're going to start with some brief remarks by the president of the National Arts Club, Mr. David Doty.
Hope everyone's well. Yes, it's a pretty nice little video there. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the National Arts Club and to this very special event celebrating Master Drawing Week in New York City. My name is David Doty. As Nadine just told you, I'm president of the National Arts Club, and I see many faces I'm familiar with out there. And on behalf of the Board of Governors, the Exhibitions Committee, and the members of the National Arts Club, I share my enthusiasm with you for today's important panel discussion. Of course, a special thanks goes to our panelists, Sarah Cash, Associate Curator of American and British Painting at the National Gallery of Art, and Dr. Marcus Burke, Curator Emeritus at the Hispanic Museum and Library. Great new partner of ours. I'm aware that all of you, as you entered 15 Gramercy Park this morning, you were expecting to see the brilliant Gouache studies by Joaquín Sorolla for his vision of Spain. Unfortunately, there was a little hiccup in the delivery and installation of these masterworks, but nonetheless, the National Arts Club, you will be obviously seeing this wonderful panel discussion here. But in addition, the National Arts Club is filled with reminders of the colors and dimensions of Sorolla's homeland, life, and legacy. When you came up the stairs to your right, and as you go down the stairs, obviously it'll be to your left, you may have noticed Robert Henry's commanding portrait of Eugenie Stein in Spanish gypsy dress. Spanish art was essential to Henry's development as an artist, and by just a few years, he and Sorolla were exact contemporaries. It was on that very staircase that I realized with my friend Guillaume Kainz, who is the CEO and director of the Hispanic Society, that the blacks themselves, the large formats, the shapes of the paintings, reminded me so much of what I remember from the Prado. If any of you have been there, I'm sure you're familiar with those astonishing blacks. And if you've been to the Hispanic Society Museum and Library, you have seen similar blacks. If you had continued up the staircase to the fourth floor, if that little rope weren't there to prevent you from doing that, you would have found Henry's personal art library, which includes a complete edition of Goya's Los Caprichos. In the parlor, just behind those beautiful wooden doors there, you can see a masterwork of American sculpture, Anna Hyatt Huntington's Joan of Arc. Hyatt Huntington was the first woman sculptor elected as an Artist Life member of the National Arts Club in 1925. And how this ties into today's lecture, in 1923, she married Archer Milton Huntington, founder of the Hispanic Museum and Library. Archie, as I dare call him today, don't tell him, I don't think you can reach him, was a charter member of the National Arts Club, and he served several terms himself as an honorary vice president. So, a masterpiece in the making marks our first collaboration with the Hispanic Society, and with it not only has our history, our common histories come together, but we've been able to bring all of you together with this. So I would like to invite the panelists to come up and begin the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. Sorry, there was a little confusion on my part about who was going first. That's me. I'm Sarah Cash, Associate Curator of American and British Paintings at the National Gallery. Can everyone hear me okay? You're a little bit of an echo. A little louder, okay. wanted to make sure I wasn't echoing. Let's see. I have some slides, and Nadine, I don't know if some of the lights can come down a little bit, please, so you can see better, a little more contrast. Probably my fault for using yellow type and white type. Can't change it now. Okay. Let's see, my talk will be about a few different things this morning. One part of it will be about the exhibition Sargent in Spain, which I had the privilege and pleasure of co-curating with Richard Ormond and Elaine Kilmurray. That exhibition just closed at the National Gallery of Art a couple of weeks ago, but it will be on view at the Legion of Honor in San Francisco if you did not see it in Washington, and you can see it in San Francisco. I'll be telling you a little bit about that exhibition. I'll also be sharing something of what I've been thinking about the relationship between Sargent's views of Spain and Sorolla's views of Spain, although you hear more about Sorolla, of course, from Dr. Burke. And as it is Master Drawings Week, I'll be sharing some fabulous drawings from Sargent in Spain. So I will jump right in. And as you can see on this, thank you, Nadine, for the lights. There are the dates of the Sargent in Spain show in San Francisco, should you find yourself in the Bay Area in the next few months. And I've paired those with a map and a key showing John Singer Sargent's travels in Spain. He traveled there 7 times as an adult over the course of 6 different years, as I hope you can see on the key. And the exhibition that was just at the National Gallery and will soon be in San Francisco is an exhibition of about 130 works focusing on Sargent's travels in Spain from 1879 all the way to 1912. And as you can see from the map, this was no dilettante traveler. He traveled all over the country, had very specific reasons for going to these different places in Spain, and it is a wonderful show. I hope you get to see it, but I'll show you a few highlights this morning. First section of you can see I've sort of tweaked the section title of my exhibition, or the title of the exhibition, which is Sargent in Spain, because I will be talking a little bit about Sorolla, and it's been really wonderful to revisit some of Sorolla's work. I'm by no means, especially not compared to Dr. Burke, an expert on Sorolla, but I've enjoyed thinking about Sargent and Sorolla. First section of the exhibition and first section of my PowerPoint is about Sargent and his study of the Spanish masters, especially on his very first trip to Spain in 1879 when he was 23 years old, where he had just finished training in Paris with Carolus Duran, his great teacher and mentor. And Carolus Duran told Sargent to go study Velázquez, ceaselessly study Velázquez. So Sargent packed up his bags in Paris, made his way to Madrid, and signed up to be a copyist at the Prado Museum, and where the copyist registers still exist. And I've just tipped in a few examples of the works that Sargent copied when he was at the Prado in the fall of 1879. Studying Velázquez, not making precise copies, but rather his own interpretations, his own riffs on Velázquez paintings in the Prado. Most notably, of course, Las Meninas. As I'm showing you here on the screen, Sargent's copy is nowhere near as large as Velázquez's painting in the Prado, although I've shown them here same size. And you can probably also see that Sargent is learning so much from Velázquez, but also making Velázquez's own in terms of his Sargent's own brushwork, his own use of values and tones. And Sargent is very much blocking in the figures on the right in the painting, not finishing them necessarily in the faces, but just trying to study very hard and learn lots of lessons from Velázquez, whose influence continued during Sargent's career, and that is part of one of the messages of the Sargent in Spain exhibition. The influence of Velázquez on paintings like The Daughters of Edward Darley Boyd, and even a painting just done a couple of years after Sargent's first trip to Spain in Venice, Venetian interior that you see at the bottom right. That sense of mysterious recession, the darks and lights, the free brushwork, and in the case of Venetian interior, even that open doorway at the back very much represents Sargent channeling Velázquez, as it were. Sorolla, of course, also revered Velázquez, and although I know Sorolla also made a copy of Las Meninas. I could not find an image of it, but in other works that Sorolla made, he was very much thinking about his study of Velázquez. Sargent painted and copied full compositions, as he did with Las Meninas, but also chose to paint details of certain Velázquez paintings in the Prado in that fall of 1879, like these two remarkable paintings that are in the exhibition. Sargent also admired very much Goya, and on that first trip to Madrid in 1879, sought out Goya's murals in the Chapel of St. Anthony of Florida in Madrid, just outside the historic center, or not far from the Royal Palace in any case, creating this magnificently fresh and beautiful oil-on panel. Sargent was using a lot of thin mahogany panels at this time for their transportability. He carried them in a little slotted painting box. And to circle back to the Hispanic Society for a moment, how wonderful that the Hispanic Society just acquired the drawing seen at the far left of the screen, one of the preparatory sheets for the El Greco seen in the center of the screen at the Prado. And then at the right, as you can see, Sargent's own take, his own copy of the Holy Trinity that he made in 1895 when he returned to the Prado on one of his later trips to Spain. So it's kind of all our worlds coming together in this one slide, which I kind of love. Second section of the exhibition of Sargent in Spain, and I'll be showing you a few Sorolla images. It's about dance and music, Sargent's love of dance and music, particularly flamenco. And I don't think Marcus and I, Dr. Burke and I, could have a spirited discussion about what's depicted in the painting at the left, I'm sure, in the Hispanic Society's collection. We're very, very grateful for the loan of this painting to Sargent in Spain. It apparently does not depict flamenco, however. We can maybe talk about that during the Q&A. According to our research, we're able to show it in the exhibition, this wonderful romantic, perhaps starlit painting in conjunction with the oil studies for it. I'm showing you those two at the right. And also pencil studies for the Spanish dance, also included in the exhibition. The master drawings of which I spoke a few minutes ago. Just fantastic to see Sargent's working methods, how he's coming together, bringing together all of this raw material and creating this remarkable painting, the Spanish dance. El Jaleo probably needs no introduction by me. It is not in the exhibition in Washington or San Francisco. Proved to be a complicated loan to get, but I'm very proud that we were able to display a reproduction and also, I think, a very thoughtful interpretation of this painting and its importance to Sargent's relationship to Spain. And we showed it in Washington and will show it in San Francisco, along with a number of fantastically beautiful pencil studies, watercolors like the one at the bottom right that relate to the finished painting. These incredible sketches, which were generously lent by the Gardner Museum in Boston, sketches that Sargent made possibly in Spain, maybe in Paris, we're not sure. He left behind very little in the way of writings and memoirs about, or journals or lists in terms of anything that he produced in his life, sadly. So we don't know, but what we do have is the physical evidence of these remarkable works of art from two sketchbooks that Sargent gave to Isabella Stewart Gardner that have been long since disbound, happily for us and visitors to Sargent in Spain. We can see these sketches all individually instead of in a sketchbook. And here are more. Sargent just trying to get the hand gestures of flamenco just right, and that beautiful sketch at the right with all of the kind of outstretched arms as he's repeating, studying until he can just get this just right, just to his satisfaction. Sargent returned to the dance in 1890, about the time that he met a very well-known flamenco dancer named La Carmencita. Her stage name was La Carmencita. Her given name was Carmen Deuset Moreno. From Andalusia, she became very well-known performing in Spain, in Paris, and in New York City, in vaudeville houses, probably not very far from this very location. Sargent met her when she performed in New York and attended parties with Mrs. Gardner and William Merritt Chase. And Sargent captured her in motion in a very little-known painting at the left. There are many, many loans from private collections to the exhibition, and these remarkable, very lively sketches that are just incredible to behold and to look at very up close, very carefully in and of themselves, and also as in their relationship to the finished painting. And I've included here an image of the Sorolla mural, one of the Sorolla paintings in the mural cycle that I know Dr. Burke will tell us more about, just to give a sense of both artists' very intense interest in the Spanish dance. The next section of the exhibition, Sargent in Spain, is about architecture and gardens, remarkable drawings of facades in places like Palma, as I'm showing you here, and Sargent's great oil of the Court of the Myrtles, which I'm showing you here, with Sorolla's own oil of the same subject. Again, just to be clear, that my exhibition is Sargent in Spain, but I'm, because of this morning's program, very, very happily showing you Sorolla images. And again, it was great to sort of revisit this material after the great Sargent Sorolla exhibition that Dr. Burke was involved with many years ago, for example. Great to see these two paintings together, at least on the screen. Sorolla and Sargent also painted at the Royal Gardens around Madrid, including La Granja, two very different works by the artists, who, by the way, were friends and correspondents, and we think that they met around 1900. We were just talking about this last night. We know that they crossed paths. The next section of Sargent in Spain is about land and people. And here I'm showing you the embodiment, in a way, of the friendship between Sargent and Sorolla. The image at the left is actually Sorolla's a study for a painting I'll show you in a moment called Sad Inheritance. It happens to be a study that Sorolla gave to Sargent's contemporary, William Merritt Chase. Sorolla also gave a painting very similar to the one on the left to Sargent, an image of which was not available. It is a similar study. These works were exchanged in friendship. Sargent gave the watercolor at the right to Sorolla. The watercolor at the right is in the Sargent in Spain exhibition on loan from the Museo Sorolla in Madrid. For those of you who have not visited that fantastic institution, I know that several of you have been there. It's well worth a visit. So the two exchanged these gifts, Sargent and Sorolla. Well, the one on the left, very close to the one that Sorolla gave to Sargent. And the painting at the left is a study for a very, very large, important painting called Sad Inheritance, of these young children, young boys, at a beach in Valencia, I think. Is that right, Dr. Burke? And a priest, I believe, tending to the children, many or all of whom have disabilities and challenges of one sort or another. A very large painting shown publicly in 1900, just to give you an idea of what Sad Inheritance, the finished painting, looks like. It brought to mind, when I looked at Sad Inheritance and thought about this artistic exchange between Sargent and Sorolla, I also thought about Sargent's painting at the left, which is in the exhibition Sargent in Spain. A remarkable painting that came on loan, is on loan, from the National Gallery of Victoria, showing Sargent's view of the interior of the Hospital of St. John of God in Granada, a light-filled, heat-filled painting of patients in this hospital for indigents, as it is today, as it was in Sargent's day, and his focus not only on the Renaissance architecture that he so loved, but also on these figures, young and old, bandaged, injured, this incredible kind of coming together of humanity and emotion and physical challenges, which not that there's really a formal relationship between these two images, but I was just thinking about them together as I was putting together this talk. Sargent and Sorolla also showed great empathy, great love for the Spanish people, including what we call in the exhibition, Sargent in Spain, the Spanish Roma people. We made a very calculated, careful, studied decision not to use the words gypsy, gitano, or gitana in the exhibition. We convened an advisory group to discuss that issue, and we're very careful about the titling of works of art in the exhibition. That aside for the moment, I love looking at these two paintings together, very close in date, and showing each of the artists very, again, I think very carefully observed details of Spanish Roma life and great love of pattern and light. Those polka dots, polka dotted skirts, the patterns of the cueva, or the cave that was built by into the hillside of Granada or Guadix. We're not sure the location of the painting at the right, but I would love to see these two paintings together. In fact, Dr. Burke and I were talking last night and this morning, maybe a future project is Sargent and Sorolla in Spain. I think I have at least one exhibition left in me. How about you? At least. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. I also was looking at Sorolla's painting at the left and thinking, put me in mind, and vice versa, of Sargent's painting at the right, painted in Granada in 1912. And if there is one painting, but there are many that invite close inspection and invite you to see this show in San Francisco if you haven't seen it already, it is the painting at the right. There are many works. This is one of my very favorites. This vibrant study of pattern and sunlight and shadow in this courtyard in Granada, in the Albaicin neighborhood, women washing clothes, men and women at the lower right shucking maize, shucking corn, little girl at the lower left with her doll, and animals that are sort of hiding out and blending into the cobblestone courtyard. Those grapes hanging overhead it's an outdoor scene, a little bit different obviously than the Sorolla, but I was thinking a lot about women and work and Sargent's interest in these scenes of everyday life. Sorolla and Sargent also painted the precisely the same view of the Sierra Nevada mountains from precisely the same spot near the Jewish cemetery in Granada, very close to the Alhambra Palace. Excuse me, they didn't ever paint side by side, but Sorolla painted more than one view, more than only the view that I'm showing you at the right. Sargent, that we know of, painted only this oil of the Sierra Nevada, but they clearly both loved this particular vista. Sargent in Spain, the second to last section of the exhibition is about Sargent's 2 trips to Mallorca in 1908. He went first in June to kind of scope out the situation, see if it was worthy of a return visit in the autumn, and decided that in fact it was. He came back in the autumn, went back to Mallorca in the autumn of 1908 with his sister Emily, also a painter, and their friend Eliza Wedgwood, the Wedgwood China family. And Sargent, in my view, painted some of the most remarkable and radical works on that second trip to Mallorca, when he was primarily in Valdemosa on the northwest coast of the island. The first trip was spent primarily in Palma. And works like the ones I'm showing you on the screen are just incredible studies, again, of pattern, of sunlight, of heat, of shadow. And the painting on the right of pomegranates in particular is immersive, is almost abstract in the sense that we don't see the sky. It's almost as if we are standing in this pomegranate tree with these bursting fruits. It is one of the most remarkable pictures. And did I mention, worth a trip to San Francisco? Because you won't see it anywhere else. It's in a private collection. And Sorolla and Sargent also both, clearly from this slide anyway, loved painting on the coast of Mallorca, producing quite different works, but I think traversing a lot of the same ground when they were visiting the island at different times, again, not together. And it may seem a little bit elementary, but some of the pairings I chose, I just was remarking at the similarities in choice of subject, if not, very different handling, I think, of paint and light and shadow in some ways between Sorolla and Sargent. But the painting on the watercolor on the right is in the exhibition. And when I came across the Sorolla at the left, it just reminded me of the painting from Cincinnati. Final section of the exhibition is about Sargent's interest in spirituality and religion. Incredible drawings that he made in places like Tarragona and Leon and elsewhere in Spain on all of the 7 trips that he made to Spain, from age 23 to 1912 when he was 56 years old, studying religious architecture, altarpieces, Madonnas, crucifixes, through the whole time producing drawings, watercolors, and oils. 2 of my very favorites are the ones I'm showing you on the screen right now. And Sargent used a lot of this raw material, these studies of religious iconography in Spain, particularly in Andalusia. Sargent received a commission to paint a series of murals for the Boston Public Library called The Triumph of Religion. He received the commission in 1890. He worked on the murals until 1919, for 29 years. It was a very ambitious project. Now I'm showing you the exterior of the Boston Public Library and just a view of the Triumph of Religion murals. So Sargent was interested in the iconography, the tradition, the performances of Spanish Catholicism from a very early age. But after he received the commission to paint the murals in 1890, he became even more interested in that imagery and produced five of the paintings of the mural series. And there are about, 12 or 15 paintings total. These are oils on canvas that you're seeing in the slide on the right. Sargent painted them in his London studio, and they made their way across the ocean. They're oils on canvas. He had a scale model constructed in his studio of wooden armatures, so he could paint these oils on canvas to scale for the space. It was really incredible undertaking that he did. So 5 of these oils on canvas, and I'm showing you 3 here, were particularly indebted to Sargent's interest in Spanish Catholicism and the imagery of Spanish Catholicism, the Messianic era, the sorrowful mysteries, and the Madonna painting, Madonna of the Sorrows, that you see at the far right. The murals originally were going to be about Spanish literature, but Sargent actually had sort of free reign in the subject matter that he wanted to paint, and he ended up wanting to paint about sort of the whole history of religion. And these are 3 of the 5 works most strongly influenced by his interest in Spanish imagery. Just to show you a little bit about that before I close, the crucifix, sorry, let me just go back. Yeah, so the painting at the right, which is the mural painting in Boston, incorporates a lot of the imagery that Sargent made in Spain, from an oil on the first trip at the far left to the drawing at the top. But also, the murals in Boston are indebted to photographs that Sargent collected. He also made some photographs, took some photographs, and they're in the Sargent in Spain show. But there are about 600 photographs, loose photographs, that Sargent collected that his sisters, Emily and Violet, gave to the Victoria and Albert Museum right after Sargent's death. And they've only been sort of rediscovered, gathered together, cataloged in the last 10 years or so, which is remarkable. And they're telling us, us scholars, people interested in Sargent, so much about Sargent's interests and the kinds of photographs. These are commercial photographs produced by photographers in Madrid, in Andalusia. Sargent bought them at photographer studios. I'm sure the one I'm showing you on the screen is a photograph of a Semana Santa, Holy Week procession in Seville. Figures carrying that float that you see. So these are the kinds of things Sargent was creating, he was collecting, that influenced the mural imagery. Likewise, when we look at the Madonna of the Sorrows, the oil on the far right. It's very hard to get good photographs of these murals in Boston. Highly recommend that you go there for yourself and see the cycle. The watercolor at the top center, the photographs at the left in the V&A's collection that, again, Sargent collected. I think you can see, without my even pointing out to you, the similarities in the imagery between what Sargent was making, what he was collecting, even that little relief at the bottom center of a Madonna, which remarkably descended in the family of John Singer Sargent. And I feel quite sure Sargent bought it at an antique shop in Spain because he was so interested in these Madonnas and their wide copes and the half moon at the bottom. I happened to see it on the wall of a descendant of John Singer Sargent in London, and I asked, what is that relief? Can you tell me about that relief? And the person said, oh, it's just something else that descended in John Singer Sargent's family. And I looked at it, and that very morning I had been at the Victoria and Albert Museum looking at the photographs that you see at the left, and the one I just showed you a moment ago, and others, and I thought, well, this clearly is Sargent interested in this image of the Madonna, visiting an antique shop and thinking, we don't have documentation of this, but this is we all have to do a lot of our jobs based on what we research and what we think and what we know. So I love the idea that Sargent's collecting photographs, collecting reliefs, painting objects, and then taking all of this, putting it into a sort of creative mixing bowl and coming up with his murals in Boston. And here are two more of the photos that I had seen at the Victoria and Albert Museum just before I'd seen that sculptural relief. And I know that Dr. Burke will speak more about this, about the vision of Spain murals, but I thought it was instructive to show a couple of images from Andalusia on the left, Galicia on the right, both places that Sargent loved and traveled to on his many journeys to Spain. And I will leave you with this image. The mural at the Hispanic Society at the left, and one of the murals from the cycle in Boston at the right. Not contemporaneous, but almost contemporaneous. And I think Dr. Burke will tell you more about whether we think Sorolla visited Boston and saw the murals. We were talking about that last night. We're not certain about it, but it's so interesting to see this subject matter in the hands of these contemporaries. And in case you missed it, there are the dates of the exhibition in San Francisco. So thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Just a minute, I have to load the other PowerPoint. Do I do save or don't save?
Always save.
I don't know, it's an
Let me
apple.
help you.
It's an apple. I want to just close it, but it's not closing. That I can do. All right, thank you. All right. Well, good morning, thrill seekers. I'm here, it turns out, as a prophet rather than a commentator on what was a wall. I've been somewhat incommunicado in Central Europe for 2.5 weeks, and what I'm going to do now is talk about the Sorolla Gouaches that are going to be here, filling this room and the adjacent one within a matter of several weeks. And this is very much with regard to Master Drawings Weeks, because they are drawings, very large drawings in watercolor with body color. Gouache is watercolor, of course. And they're remarkably, as you will see, modern in their style and indeed intent. I will say, by the way, with regard to Sorolla going to Boston, he had an exhibition in Boston in 1911. He must have gone there. We don't have a lot of documentation. But Mr. Huntington certainly went there. And the relationship between Mr. Huntington and Isabel Stewart Gardner is well known. Mr. Huntington certainly had interacted with Sargent at points, and I think it's almost certain that those and the Elihu Vedder murals in the Library of Congress were very much in their mind as they went forward, as Elihu Vedder's partner was an early curator and trustee of the Hispanic Society. So that these things are almost certain, or at least very likely. I'm going to speak about these gouache studies for our mural cycle by Sorolla, painted between 1911 and 1919, and installed between 1923 and 26 after the artist's death in what was then a reading room intended space in the Hispanic Society of America, which now is known as the Hispanic Society Museum and Library. We're up at 155th Street in Upper Manhattan. We were hoping to have a part of our main gallery and the Sorolla Murals Room open at the end of this month, but that too will be put off for a few weeks and will come online somewhere around the turn of February to March, and that will be announced. And you will once again be able to come up and visit these magnificent works of art. The title of this series is something that has changed over the years. The artist himself referred to it as the regions of Spain, in what I can find his writing. The Spanish people tend to refer to it as properly an artist's vision of Spain, and somehow that's been truncated to vision of Spain, which grates on me horribly. That came about around the 1940s. And we, when I say we, my predecessors, published them as the provinces of Spain, which they are not. They show the regions, and a couple of those regions are provinces, but never mind. But the idea is a regionalist view of a European country, and that's something that's very important. But we're talking not about iconography here, but about artistic purpose. Joaquín Sorolla y Bastida, who lived from 1863 to 1923, was well known to Americans, even from the 1890s, from works of art that had entered American private collections, and especially in 1900, when he and Sargent and Anders Zorn, who were all very similar in their stylistic approaches, won medals at the Exposition Universelle in Paris. We have an anecdote in our records that the three of them went out to Maxime's and had lunch to celebrate it, and I would have liked to have been at that party. But anyway, after that, Sorolla, excuse me, no, just leave it there, it's all right. After that, Sorolla was the best-known Spanish artist internationally at the turn of the 20th century. In 1908, he had an exhibition in London where our founder, Mr. Archer Milton Huntington, purchased 4 or 5 portraits and commissioned another one to replace one of the portraits in the exhibition, and began talking with Sorolla about bringing an exhibition to New York, which he did in the early winter of 1909, February, where 168,000 visitors made the trek up to 155th Street. The subway was open, okay? Mr. Huntington, the son of a railroad magnate, chose the location because he knew the railroad was coming. And we still have that stop, 157th on the 1 train. Anyway, 168,000 visitors came, one of the first blockbusters in New York in 4 weeks. And at that point, Mr. Huntington and Sorolla began talking about Sorolla contributing to the decoration of the society, especially a space that was being constructed between us and the American Academy of Arts and Letters, or actually between us and the Numismatic Society, which is now a building owned by the American Academy of Arts and Letters, that was going to be a reading room. And the correspondence of people at that time, especially in Spain, referred to the decoration of the library. Sorolla returned to the United States in 1911 for an exhibition at Chicago and St. Louis. While he was in the United States, he painted a great many portraits. By this point, he was very, very famous. He had portrayed in 1909 President Taft, for example. I show you on the left Louis Comfort Tiffany in his garden at Laurelton Hall, Long Island. That's Cold Spring Harbor behind him. And then on the right, a portrait done in Chicago, Mrs. Ira Nelson Morris, whose maiden name was Lily Constant Rothschild, and her children painted in Chicago in 1911. Before I go any further, I really should show you the murals, because we're talking about studies for something, and thank you for showing all those wonderful detailed blow-ups of individual pieces. I'm showing you the massively large portrait painting of Castilla at the top, which is the frontispiece of the exhibition. I'm doing this panorama at the bottom to show you how it relates to the side walls around it. The murals are big. They're 11.5 feet tall. The figures are all life-sized, and they run for 197 feet, 197 running feet of oil on canvas, almost all of it painted entirely by the artist. He had people to grind colors and so forth and stretch canvases and what happened, but he painted it over the course of 9 exhausting years. Here is the north wall on the right, leading from Castile into Andalusia through Valencia and Catalonia. And at the bottom, the west wall as it folds into the, the south wall as it folds into the east wall, which has a not quite as large portrait of Andalusia, which Sarah very kindly showed you as well. Now, in 1911-12, 2 competing ideas for how to organize this room evolved. Sorolla was in constant touch with the architects. How are we going to cut the corners so a work of art can be put in the corners? That's very typical. When you have a rectangular square room, you cut the corners, you get 4 extra pictures in, right? And don't have things going in corners. One of these ideas was to have a continuous frieze. A continuous frieze about this high, running all the way around the room, 197 feet. And as you see from the work, the studies on the one at the top left, that frieze would run above portraits of Hispanic men and women. Mr. Huntington not only hired as professionals women, but he also collected images of women as well as their literary works and so forth. And unlike Columbia University, which has the most extraordinary collection of dead white men chiseled into their buildings, we have both men and women chiseled into our buildings, because Mr. Huntington was very interested in the contribution of women to both scholarly and literary culture, as well as history. So you see on the bottom right a picture that's going to be in the show right there by the door when it is hung, showing a moment when that frieze became individual easel pictures carried up to the wall. Not exactly a quadro riportato, because that has to do with ceiling paintings and so forth. But you can see it, that you still have the portraits below, but you're beginning to get individual regional scenes there. We will have in the exhibition an example of this continuous frieze, which shows the Basque country, Navarre, Aragon, northeastern Spain, and parts of the Levant or eastern coast down to Alicante, which is almost into Andalusia, part of Valencia, but running into Andalusia. And you can see how this gouache is getting that panoramic effect. Now, what are we looking at here? We are looking at rolls, 1 meter 23 high, 4 feet high, rolls of craft paper, brown paper, like butcher paper but not waxed. And he made massive rolls, and as he worked, he spooled them off to whatever length he wanted. And in one case, that length is 8+ meters, 25 or 26 feet long. 4 by 25 would be the whole wall over there. That one's not going to be in the show, but there will be one over here almost that big. This one you see. And they allowed him to work in gouache, in watercolor and charcoal, in a way that gave a sense of the scale of the final work. You see what I mean? Now, when we think of big modern drawings, we think of Matisse, cut paper. We think a lot of the abstract expressionists doing these large-scale works. Actually, they're large-scale watercolors going back to the 18th century, and they're not unusual, but they don't have this panoramic aspect. Now, to understand Sorolla, we must go back to the 1850s in Italy with a group of avant-garde proto-impressionist artists called the Macchiaioli. Say that 3 times. The Macchiaioli, that was a name given them, the way that Impressionists was given to the Impressionists, because they used macchiae, spots, in their paintings, like when you get a cup of espresso macchiato, right, spotted with milk, right? And the Macchiaioli used these spots to break up a sketch into an abstract field, but then they went from a sketch to a painting this big, same brushwork. Then they took that image from a painting this big to big as a wall, same brushwork. And Spanish artists, especially in the eastern schools of Barcelona and Valencia, picked up on this. They had their studios in Rome. Sorolla went to Rome, and his slightly older Valencian colleagues had studios in Rome, which they rebuilt in Valencia, matching the Via Margutta in Rome. And they used this same blowing up of sketchy brushwork as an abstraction motif. And it's different from the petite sensation de couleur in the Impressionism, because it's not color theory based. It goes back to Titian and what Titian's contemporaries said about his late works, where you look at the pictures up close, there's spots, you get back and it's an image. Velasquez, very similar sort of thing. So it all fits. And this sketchy brushwork that you will see on the screen now and in the exhibition is blown up to the size of a wall, which is what gives the murals so much energy and life. It's not just this tableau vivant of various scenes going around, but the brushwork pumping energy into the visual field, and the play of light hypnotizing you. And indeed, there's a whole iconography of regional meteorological effects going on. All right, now, I need a volunteer from the audience. You go that way.
Okay.
I'll go this way. We published this fanfold book of the murals at a small scale. It will give you, now let's stretch it up so it goes vertically. It'll give you an idea of what the effect is. There aren't very many decorated spaces in New York. The elevator banks of Rockefeller Center, right? They go there underneath, up, 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 up. He says, up, everybody. The building that the Museo del Barrio is in, it also has a children's theater with amazing murals in it. Staten Island's got a number. There's a couple of Brooklyn. The Reginald Marsh murals, the Customs House. Not many, unlike, say, any European city of this size, would have maybe hundreds of such decorated spaces.
So this is really an extraordinary resource, cultural resource in New York that Sorolla created all by himself over 9 years. Now, let's get going here. Here you have Castile again, 11.5 by 47 feet. It's actually Old and New Castile, not just Castilla, because it shows
Avila from Old Castile on the left, and Toledo from New Castile, with the Guadarrama Mountains kind of sticking in between them. But of course, they're 300 kilometers away, not across the valley. It's an artist's vision of something, not a reportage simply. But he did go around to all the regions and make oil painting sketches, and then went back and worked in these gouaches to work it in, so that there is a realistic aspect that's very closely anchored, but entirely reformulated according to fairly abstract principles. And then here we have, facing it, you see at the bottom, this large panel of Andalusia to kind of give weight across the space. One very interesting aspect of the gouaches is the use of collage, papier collé, which is, of course, a quintessentially modernist technique and stylistic element. Here you see one of the gouaches that's not in the exhibition, but on the right I'm showing you a woman from Castile, from La Lagartera, with a campaniform skirt, a bell-shaped skirt. Sorolla was fascinated by this silhouette. She is, in fact, the hinge around which the entire composition revolves. And you see on the left, I don't know, I'll have to point. You see her here in one of the gouaches.
she's actually a cutout pasted in. And he made these cutouts, and we're going to have these cutouts exhibited in the show. And he'd go put it here, turn them around, play with it. But they also inspired him to make compositional changes in the whole unit of composition. So this interaction with the process of a work of art is very modern. And the brushwork is indeed expressive. And in many of them that you'll see in the exhibition, the color, slapping you in the face, exploding across the single compositional unit. That, the use of color in an expressive way, highly abstracted. We're talking about 1911 to 19. Can you think of some German and maybe Scandinavian artists doing this sort of thing? And even going further, in the case of someone like Mondrian, into pure abstraction with it. But because it's realistic, we don't have a framework, an intellectual, epistemological framework, to understand it as modern art. And the same thing applies to John Singer Sargent over and over and over again. If I sound a little evangelical, I've been doing this for about 40 years. But you see what I'm talking about. It's very important for the future of art today to understand what happened at the beginning of the abstract art. Not that we're coming out of the abstract art, but we need to know what it actually meant. Well, okay. Back to art.
Now, in the exhibition, we have this image of two Basque women that you see at the upper right. It comes from one of these panels of the cutout figures. One carrying a laundry on her head. And you can see them in the gouache on the left that's in the exhibition, striding off into what will be another panel of this that has now been cut up and put somewhere else. And at the bottom, you see them flipped around and going the other way. The mirror images reverses it, see? And so you can see in this exhibition an artist really making almost action pictures, but using these different media and using this extraordinary idea of this craft paper as a field in which he can play panoramically. Here I'm showing you a slide of just a selection of these images of cutout figures that he would use and recombine. The one on the lower left shows people from Salamanca and Galicia, and the little corner of Leon next to Galicia. And you'll notice bagpipers, Galicia, Gaul, Wales, Celts. There's a theme here in terms of international Paleolithic and early historical European culture. In this case, we have another diptych of the Basque country, which is really extraordinary. We didn't realize these two went together until rather recently, well after they were conserved, and all of a sudden we said, whoa, they are two parts of what was a single unit that had been separated over the years in the 20s and so forth. And you can see it just goes right together. However, the part on the left is extremely interesting because there are multiple layers of collage in it. And I'll just show you in the slide. This is about the exact size of the work of art.
And this is pasted in. She's pasted in. There's a lot of pasting in all this figure. And then you'll notice the sense of these reds. They're a little faded in the slide, and they go across the whole diptych. Back up.
Like a string of firecrackers. You see the red going across this, a much better color slide. You see the red popping across that composition? And he would use that. And in the large murals, you get that as well, but it's a little bit, because it's more realistic, you have to look for it rather carefully. Now, the other thing he did in these gouaches is he played around with a combination of imagery. So for Castilla la Nueva, New Castile, where he's using Toledo, he does different views of Toledo to see how they're going to work. This is rather closer to the actual mural. But then again, he played with it in a different way here. Notice these framing bars. Wait, let me get back to one that was free. See the framing bars where he painted or sketched with charcoal in different framings? He tended to paint paintings flat on a panel, stretch them, meaning crop them like photographs. Very modern technique, although Impressionists obviously influenced by photography as well. And the other thing is he had different parts of Spain, and these little fragments of imagery would bring in this case, Asturias, Logroño Cathedral, and that was intended to paste in somewhere. He changed his mind and he cut it out of that composition, but he kept it to possibly use somewhere else. Here we see that same image of Castilla, almost identical to the mural, but Burgos and Soria are in the background, not Avila and Toledo. Some of the works were for large pictures that never got painted. Here we've got a bunch of clerics with an archbishop, cardinal archbishop from the red gloves, I assume. And see that burst of red in the middle again? He even used that kind of touch to wake you up in sketches he did in the lunchroom of a hotel in Chicago. And he put a piece of red in it with a red Conte crayon. And then others that got into the final composition, as in here the bullfighters, but in an entirely different compositional format, because he put the bullfighter scene in one of those four corners I talked about. So a horizontal composition became vertical, but the same elements are there, including the light and shadow of your seats in a bull ring. By the way, if you go to a bullfight in Spain, you want to sit in the shadow. Well, this has been a Vorspeise, an hors d'oeuvre, of what you're going to get in these rooms. It's an overwhelming experience. I just want to add that it's also the product of a long conservation program. All the ones that we'll be exhibiting were conserved in Valencia in one of the primary international institutes of modern paper composition. But we've been working this out over many years, and Robert and Nadine, there will be a panel talking about the conservation, right? Yeah, so you'll be able to give credit where credit's due. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Would like to now invite the panelists for some Q&A. Any questions? Oh, here we go. All right.
Did you find any magic lantern slides when you were looking at the photography information from Sargent?
Magic lantern slides. No, as a matter of fact. But Sargent did, there are two types of photographs that he made that are featured in Sargent in Spain. And photographs of Spanish subject matter, although he did use these two photography methods elsewhere besides Spain. They were glass stereographs. He made hundreds of glass stereographs, Sargent did. And again, in about, most of them in 1912, when he was in Granada on his final trip to Spain, where he spent almost exclusively, he was in Granada almost exclusively. So glass stereographs, and also tiny little postcards, a medium which is now called real photo postcards. But these are photographs. Kodak came out in 1903 with a very special camera that people like Sargent could use to take photographs and have the film developed and printed onto postcard stock. It's a fascinating sort of little rabbit hole that I went down. There was a great exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston just last year of the Leonard Lauder collection of real photo postcards. Sending postcards was an incredible craze in the early 20th century. Kodak, not wanting to miss out on craze, released this camera in 1903, and then in the aughts, the teens, and the 30s, in this country and also elsewhere, people were taking these photographs. In Sargent's case, all of those photographs descended, all the photographs in general, the real photo postcards and the glass stereographs, descended in Sargent's family. And the real photo postcards that Sargent was taking again in 1912 in Granada, he was using to kind of figure out how to frame certain compositions, certain watercolors and paintings. He wasn't creating the photographs as ends unto themselves. He was a sponge. He was interested in all kinds of creative media, and he was using these photographs as part of his working method to kind of experiment with what was new, or at least new to him, when he was making these works. So, long answer to your question.
If I could add to that, there is a famous painting by Sorolla of one of his daughters with one of those cameras. And there's also, I just got back from 2.5 weeks in Central Europe doing some archival work with my wife, who is the 7th generation of actresses in her family. And we were looking into basically her theatrical family archives. And there were hundreds of these postcards where people were taking them, going back into the 1890s, and including this Czech legion that fought its way across Russia after World War I. And everywhere they stopped, they made these postcards. Well, here I am in Novosibirsk or somewhere with the army, and poof, off goes the postcard. I mean, it really amazing. I had, this is something that I guess people are just beginning to dig out, and they are marvelous because they photo document as well as literary document the pieces.
Well, we think about ourselves taking photographs with our phones and social media, and this is what Sargent wasn't doing it for the same purpose, but he was so interested in documenting these sites that he visited. We know that he owned there's a photograph of his studio in London with a stereograph viewer, so we know that he was very interested in viewing as well as taking stereographs. Those are separate, just to be clear. The photographs that Sargent took are separate from the hundreds of photographs that he purchased, by the photographs by commercial Spanish photographers, some of the ones I showed you. But he was a collector. I mean, he collected people, he collected art, he collected reliefs, he collected photographs, and that cache of photos at the V&A, as well as photographs that he preserved in scrapbooks at the Met, and one from the Met's collection that's in our show, and one in particular from the Harvard Art Museums. He was so interested in collecting those images, and he used them later in his life and referred back to them. They were aide-memoire. They were things that he kept in his studio to key him up in the same way that the oils that he made in the Prado in the fall of 1879, they were not for sale. They were for him. And if you look at some of the photographs of Sargent's studios, you see those oils, those interpretations, Sargent's interpretations of Velázquez, they're hung on the walls of his studio to kind of key him up, to inspire him, to refer back to later on. So.
You know, in the Manet Velázquez show at the Metropolitan Museum, we had Sargent's copy of a portrait of a dwarf next to the original, which he thought was Velázquez, but is not. And there were parts of the copy that were better as a work of art than the thing being copied, because a master artist had produced the copy, and the original was produced by someone who was a master artist, but not a genius. And everybody walked by and went, oh, look at that, doing it.
Any other questions?
There was another hand up back there.
I don't see it.
I have a question. Oh, there you are. Yes, sir?
Here we go.
I was just interested in learning more about the real postcards, and were they developed in the field in Russia during the war? Did you have to send them someplace?
Well,
could they make multiple copies?
You know, it's very interesting because this Czech legion was fighting on the side of the whites, or actually not the whites exactly, of the progressive middle party, which came to become the whites, but they weren't. It was a three-way civil war. So I assume that they had a link. It was open all the way to Vladivostok, and I assume that's how they got out. When they did get to Vladivostok, there was a whole lot of these because they were there for a while, waiting for the American Navy to come and evacuate them. But somehow getting these things into some kind of international mail somehow. It surprised the heck out of me, but it was also an actress going along to city after city in Central Europe, and every place sending a picture of the square and her in the middle of it and sending it to her sister. I mean, and now I'm looking everywhere for these. I'm going to go back and see what we have from Sorolla. I don't know, and I'm going to have to ask Blanca Ponce Sorolla whether they have some in their family, because we know that they made them. But I've never seen one from his family, but I'm sure they're there, and we got to go looking for them now.
So I imagine that it would be so interesting to see, yes, if there are Sorolla photographs. I suspect there may be more Sargent photographs. So scour your markets. An adjacent answer to your question about the development of these photographs is that I'm still learning. The answer is I'm still learning myself. The photographs that Sargent took have a very particular stamp on their reverse, and the stamp is from Kodak London, a particular office in London. So I think that Sargent, and it's unclear to me whether you had to send your film away and have them printed, or whether you could do it somewhere nearby, or both. And for that, actually, it's one of my sort of offshoot projects of Sargent in Spain. I want to learn more about that and look more into it. And there's a fantastic, I mentioned the show at the MFA Boston. There's a wonderful catalog. I think it's called Real Photo Postcards that was just produced last year, in which the curator, my colleague at the MFA Boston, writes a lot more about that. But that's, again, I mentioned that Sargent documented, well, I'm sure that he kept diaries and journals because he was a person of the 19th century, and that's what you did. We don't know what happened to them, so I wish that there were notations or letters saying more about what he did, but we can learn what we can learn and then have to sort of research and contextualize the rest. But that's a very good question. I'm thinking about that because the so-called real photo postcards that are in Sargent in Spain, a few of them relate very directly to a watercolor of a fountain. I didn't show it this morning. There's one in the Met's collection and one in the Fitzwilliam's collection. It is the same fountain that Sargent photographed. And so that raises the question of who's taking the photographs, well, how long did it take to get them developed, and when did he do the watercolor? We know that he was in Granada for a few months in 1912, but I'm sure that the males were also very slow in 1912. So.
Oh, I don't know. I had a professor in graduate school who calculated that a letter got across the Atlantic faster in 1750 than it does today. I have two questions for you, if I could interrupt at this point. We understand that the Spanish dance is showing a group of professional dancers doing what we may call a Spanish tango at the point just as that dance passed to the New World. And they've actually identified some of the movements, one of which is called the hinge, where the woman dancer bends over backwards. Is that your understanding as well? Or maybe a bolero?
So, my wonderful colleague, our wonderful colleague named Nancy Heller, who is an art historian in Philadelphia, who's also a flamenco dancer, actually wrote the essay on music and dance for the Sargent in Spain catalog. And she did quite a lot of digging into what is depicted in that painting, and her findings were not conclusive, despite the fact that she consulted with a number of dance experts. When that painting was shown at the National Gallery in 1992, I was not working at the gallery at that time, but we had a large exhibition called El Jaleo, which was about the painting from the gardener, which we were able to borrow, and showed related and preparatory studies and the Spanish dance. The woman who wrote the essay, the guest curator at that time, whose name is Molly Volk, wrote about that painting depicting the tango.
On the basis of studies that were done by our curators previously.
Yes, I'm sorry, giving credit where credit is due. Sorry about that. Nancy Heller, who wrote the essay for our catalog, sort of went back, looked at all of the information, and she does not believe that the painting necessarily depicts the tango or flamenco. And she took a deep dive into the scholarship from your institution and other things. So I believe it's still a little bit of a mystery, but I always welcome opinions.
Yeah, there's a dance history issue here that the
Yes,
tango
indeed.
evolved in Argentina to a slightly different 5-unit rhythm as opposed to the bum 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 of a bolero, like Ravel, right? And it's very complicated.
Yeah.
My second question, which has to do with that wonderful series of slides you showed, beginning with the Roma woman and her daughter by Sorolla,
Yes.
and there were pairs that came out, the packing the raisins versus the women working, and so forth. And as I sat there looking at that, I thought, wow, if you took the labels off them, you might call the Sorolla a Sargent, and the Sargent a Sorolla. Especially with the image of the Roma woman and her daughter and the other image, they could really be flipped over. And I think that's really, we did the Sargent Sorolla show in Madrid, and that was our similar astonishment when we did it. Although often you'd have a Sargent watercolor, and the very similar painting by Sorolla would be as big as a wall.
Yeah,
and there are things like that were going on, but they really were participating in something, but there's half a generation there. There's what, 13-year difference or something in their ages?
Sartre was born in 1856, so they're only
56 to 63,
Yeah,
so it's only 7
not very
years.
much
Yeah,
difference, no.
a slightly older and slightly younger colleague, and the younger colleague getting a different impetus out of Italy than the Sargent did. But it's a wonderful exercise in not comparative literature, but comparative aesthetics.
Yes, there's definitely a shared sensibility between the two, which is that the exhibition was fascinating, the Sargent Sorolla show. Definitely often a big scale difference, which you notice immediately when you walk into the Sorolla Museum in Madrid, for example. And I think something of a stylistic difference, but it's fascinating to see the shared aesthetic sensibility between the two, and subject matter and more. So maybe it will be our next
But they
show.
both, at the end, well, not the end, in the last stages of their careers, move. I don't talk about the murals now. I'm talking about other works of art. They both move decidedly into post-impressionism. in my opinion, that they really, they developed their own styles, and in the case of Sorolla, he was cut down very early in his life, and we don't know, but he was certainly going into a much higher level of abstraction than had been the case.
I think we have time for one last question. I think there was one over here. Or
Two
who
over
wants
there.
to go? Who has the better question? Yeah, all right. No pressure.
Did Sargent ever make paintings based on his photographs? Because he traveled a lot and he took photos.
Yes.
And he did?
No, that yes was to, yes, I understand your question, I'm sorry. So Sargent, yes, he traveled a lot. And as I mentioned, I think it actually, there may be, again, more photographs, more glass stereographs and real photo postcards out there than we know about, or maybe they were out there, but they are no longer extant. He never, I don't think he ever based paintings on photographs. That's a sort of one-to-one solid line, right? I would call it more of a dotted line, and he was using the photographs not to copy them, but to, I think, often helping him decide how to frame, how to crop an image, a painting or a watercolor that he was making. I'm quite sure, well, we have evidence of that, and again, I'm sorry I didn't show it this morning, these watercolors of this fountain in a courtyard in the Hospital of St. John of God, in fact, the same hospital that I showed you the Sargent. So he's clearly using those real photo postcards as a way of thinking about how am I going to frame this watercolor, but he didn't ever copy, so to speak. I think it was more, he was absorbing this idea about center and edge and framing. And the painting of pomegranates that I showed you that he made in Mallorca is one that I wrote about, wrote a little bit about in my essay in the exhibition catalog. There's a series of paintings, of which that is one, of vegetation in Mallorca, where, like in that painting, there's no horizon line, no sky. It is, I call it immersive. It's like you're up in the middle of some vegetation. There is also a painting of fig leaves. There are other paintings of pomegranates. There are paintings of, what else, gourds and oils and watercolors. And I think Sargent was thinking a lot about photography when he made those works of art. I haven't found no photographs of pomegranates, so I would love to find them. But I think that he, again, thinking about photography, I'm sure I was also thinking about Japanese art and the aesthetic of Japanese art, the same way that Marcus mentioned that the French Impressionists were, because he was so interested in it. I don't think that's the only thing that informed those paintings. I think it's one of several things that he was thinking about. As he was painting en plein air, he made these paintings, many of the ones that I showed you en plein air, but also certainly finishing a lot of things in the studio.
Every single thing Sarah has just said applies to Sorolla as well. Every single thing. And he had, I think there's 3,200 photographs in the Sorolla Museum. But the only place where we think that he may have actually used one scientifically is to get a very, very difficult perspective seen in one of the murals, where he had pictures made with different lens angles, different 32 and 55 and different millimeter lenses, to just try to see what he could do with creating the illusion he wanted to create. But in Sorolla's case, his father-in-law, who was also his mentor and to some extent surrogate father, was one of the most famous photographers in 19th century Spain. So these people grew up thinking like a camera, the way that we do. We don't think about how we do that, but every one of us every day looks through that little image, right? And we're used to it. These people were used to it too, but they thought about it as an artist does, as another tool, another quiver of arrows to shoot. And that is quite clear in both artists, it seems to me.
Thank you for asking that question, though, because it's a question that has also come up with other artists like Thomas Eakins, of whom, a number of photographs by Eakins have surfaced in recent decades, and we think about artists differently, and I think some people think that's a bad thing. It's a crutch. It's something you lean on using photography, which is, mean, that sort of idea has been thrown out the window a long time ago. It's more about what Marcus and I were talking about, more about thinking about an arrow in your quiver, what you can use to, as you are thinking about making your art. So, really good question.
Didn't we have one other question back there?
I just wanted to mention Fortuny.
Oh, yes, well,
I think it was
Fortuny, who was a fellow traveler and source of inspiration for the Macchiaioli, and a bridge between them and the Neapolitan school, and to some extent the Roman school, and who everyone of Sorolla's generation looked to and revered.
And Sargent's, yeah. Sargent's
Sargent
definitely
too, yeah.
Looking at Fortuny, and another essay in the Sargent and Spain catalog that's written by Javier Barón, a curator of 19th century paintings at the Prado, writes beautifully about Sargent's interest in Spanish old masters, but also Sargent's Spanish contemporaries and near contemporaries like Fortuny. And yes, you can see that in Sargent's work in Spain, also work that he was doing, especially as a young artist, in Capri, for example. There's a almost sort of one-to-one correspondence, really thinking about Fortuny as he's painting. So
This is Fortuny the father, not Fortuny the son,
Yeah,
who's the
right.
textile designer.
Right.
Just to make it
Thank
clear
you.
to everybody.
Thank you, yes, just to make that clear.
Sargent ever meet Von Gloden by any chance?
Who?
Von Gloden.
Can you, I'm sorry.
Von Gloden. He was a photographer who only photographed like gay, like boys, like in.
Oh, the man who went to Egypt and so forth.
And Cyprus. He went to Cyprus and Egypt and so forth. That's who you're talking about? Yes, what? Right.
I can't understand the name that you're saying, or I can't.
But like, I know that he spent little time with Oscar Wilde, and Oscar Wilde was very close to Von Gloden, so I was just curious.
I've seen some correspondence between poses in Sargent and those photographs you mentioned. But in Sargent's case, the model is always a woman. So I don't know how to answer it. It may be a zeitgeist.
So a couple of things. If you look at the Victoria and Albert Museum's website, the photographs that Sargent collected, which are all, as many of those that could be recovered, and I say that because in 1925 when they were given to the V&A, they were scattered to the many corners of the V&A, different cataloging processes. A fantastic young curator has brought them back together. She hasn't found all of them, but she's found a lot of them. And they're all very beautifully cataloged on the V&A website. And there's one photograph there, which I think is by the photographer that you're mentioning, of a young male nude, man who's young. So that's pretty interesting, but we don't, yes, and I know about the Oscar Wilde connection. I think my other response or feeling or comment would be, we don't know that Sargent was gay. We think he was, but there's no, again, we don't, I think you can think about a lot of things when you look at his art. There's a new biography out of Sargent that I'm reading currently that brings together a lot of information. And I'm not saying that in a defensive way, it's just that we honestly don't know. And in the late 19th century, early 20th century, when Sargent lived, there were different sensibilities about gender and relationships between people than we have today. So I'm just mentioning that because, and last but not least, as I don't know if it necessarily, it's gonna sound old-fashioned of me, I'm not sure if it makes a difference in the way we look at Sargent's art. So just my personal take on that, but thank you for bringing that up. And also the photographer, that's really interesting, yeah.
And I think it's good to leave with that.
With that food for thought, thank you so much to our panelists,
And thank you to Master Drawing Week NYC and the Hispanic Society Museum and Library. We're the National Arts Club come back and see us soon. We host over 150 free programs annually, so check out our website. And please take a pastry home with you. There's such a thing as second breakfast. So please, please, please. Thank you so much.